What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the Thursday morning edition of the Sharp Angles podcast, where we talk about fantasy football, preview the fantasy football week to come. Already week 6. We're already to week 6. That feels unbelievable and unimaginable that this is as far as we are here in this season. But what are you going to do? Almost nearly halfway through the fantasy
A
football
third,
regular
yeah.
season.
Well,
We're getting close. We're getting close as fantasy gamers go, for sure. But we're going to preview week 6. Obviously, we're going to talk about some of the more interesting kind of situations around the league, play some real or fake, preview some games, do some uncut gems, as we do every single week. And if we're doing that, we're obviously doing that with the Swami of Konami himself, the one, the only, Rich Hribar. How you doing, Rich?
doing good, yeah. And I don't know how it is for you in a lot of your leagues. We're in a couple together, but a lot of my leagues, like you might have one team that's run hot, but then the rest of the league is largely like a huge jumble. Like everyone's kind of felt the wrath this season a little bit. Like very few teams have gone unscathed.
Yeah, there are a lot of 2 and 3 and 3 and 2 teams in
Mhm.
every league, and it's kind of funny. It's funny. We're in one league together where I'm currently 1 and 4, but like I kind of feel okay about that team. It's like it's
Got
like
enough guys
I
to start
don't.
every week.
Yeah, like I feel fine about that team, and I think I scored either the most or the second most points last week, and it just so happens that you've kind of run cold. I'm in a FFPC league, the one of the Fantasy Pros Championship, I think it is, in which I've scored like the second most points, and I'm 2 and 3. It's just been one of those weird years where it's just like it seems every week it's up and down, and like you said, everybody's feeling it. Like nobody's really running away with any of these, and so it's just been very strange. I will tell you, and if we're talking about kind of thinking forward to next year where I need to maybe amend some of what I'm doing, I think I'm in 3 Superflex redraft leagues. One of them is Scott Fishbowl, which I'm crushing in, and I'm going to be very good in that, especially since half my team is injured and I'm still crushing in that league. So I'm feeling great about that team. But the other 2, I think I'm 1 and 4 in both of them. And part of that is because I just never got that second quarterback spot right. And I'm wondering, like, I know it changes every year. Part of the reason is I was a little bit higher on Deshaun Watson, and that hasn't particularly, worked out. But like that's one of the things I'm identifying here now through 5 weeks is I need to probably amend my superflex strategy and take that second quarterback spot maybe a little bit more seriously. Because to me, it feels like, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but it feels like if you have 2 good quarterbacks this year that you can really trust, that's given you something of an advantage. Because I don't like the rest of it hasn't been so great.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's been a fairly good start for if you waited on QB this season. There are very few like elite quarterbacks that have smashed. Lamar has obviously been awesome. But
Mm.
like, Jaden Daniels, like he was kind of like the back end QB1. He's obviously been hot. And then like CJ Stroud's been pretty mid. Kyler Murray's been pretty mid. Patrick Mahomes obviously has been very, very mid. And then you
Very
guys
mid.
got like Geno. Daniel Jones has been like good for fantasy. Justin Fields was a hit. Anthony Richardson's also been bad. So like it's interesting because you might even just run cold like on the
Yeah,
guys you
I think
took.
that's probably it. Yeah, like I think it's more of like a run cold. Like I really wanted Jaden Daniels in a league, and I got outbid for him, and I ended up with Caleb Williams, and so you run cold, right? And I ended up with Sean Watson, and that has been not terrible, but not great. I really liked Geno the Smith, but I didn't end up with him. So yeah, it's probably just a variance thing. It's just one of those things. I was going through my leagues. I was thinking, what did I do wrong here? And I'm really trying to identify it. But you're right. When we're talking about like Jaden Daniels, who I know both you and I were
Even
very high
Josh
on.
Allen has been, you've
Josh
gotten
Allen.
2 amazing weeks from Josh Allen, and the other 3 have been not good.
Well, and that's funny you mentioned that because in that Scott Fishbowl, the guy that I mean, I don't know if you remember us talking about this, but I've been pretty strongly beat the drum that we should be drafting Lamar Jackson ahead of Josh Allen for most of August. And I felt very strongly about that. And then I ended up with him in Scott Fishbowl, and I feel great about that. And so it is kind of one of those things. Did you get your guys? Because if I had gotten the guys I really wanted at quarterback, if I ended up with Lamar Jackson, Jade Daniels, which is what I really wanted to do, I'm feeling absolutely amazing. And it's just a matter of, did you get them, right? And
Yep.
so maybe the idea is just go extra dollars for your dudes and hope for the best. Maybe that's the takeaway
Have that
that I need to
conviction.
do here. Have the conviction, spend the extra dollars, have the conviction, and don't just always assume you're wrong, what I generally do. It's just
I mean,
assume
it's
I'm
hard
wrong.
when you get to August. I mean, when you've just been inundated with the same information for, 4 and 5 months, sometimes it's easy to like be in your draft and come off your priors where you're just like, oh yeah, like, well, like Ray and Pat and like these guys, they like that guy. I'll take him here too. And you're like, even if you didn't like him, just because you've heard it for 4 months, like of like being on this player. So you do it, and then you're like, I didn't even like that player. What was I doing?
All right, so I'm blaming you for Deshaun Watson. That's
Yeah,
how we're
fair
doing it
enough. I'll
moving
take it.
forward. Moving forward. There are a couple things I do want to mention. You kind of wrote about this a little bit in the worksheet introduction, and that is that we have seen better offense over the last couple of weeks. We're seeing higher drop back rates. We're seeing teams throwing the ball more effectively downfield. We're seeing more big plays. I'm more interested in kind of, do you see this as a trend that we have here? Or is this just kind of some variance we're going to see week to week? Or even is it there was nowhere to go but up based on how we started the season?
Probably a little bit of all, but I haven't done enough research to say like, what has this been a trend the past 2 years? Because like we've talked about like the slow starts, whether that has to do with the preseason or not, the lack of preseason games. If it's been like a trend where like when we get October, like things improve. I haven't gone back and checked on that, but last week was a very positive week for in terms of dropbacks and big plays, right? Like the big plays are what we saw, and that's what the NFL has been lacking through like this defensive meta, like these long touchdowns and splash plays, and we saw a lot of those last week. So will that be a one-off? The one thing I'd say is the league still is taking a lot of sacks, and the offensive line play is a big issue, and the health of the offensive lines is a big issue, and maybe that's just something we're going to have to deal with. We just don't have enough linemen, and the increased game on the season, and if we get two, is just going to add to this, and it's impacting the quarterback position too. We got another 3 new quarterbacks this week. We have 3 new starters this week, maybe 4. We have Drake Maye, Raiders QB, and Rattler. I might be missing
Yeah.
one off the top of my head. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of quarterback shuffling and a lot of offensive line play still impacting a lot of games. So that's something I don't know if can be rectified, but at least October started off on the right foot. We had some fantasy points scored. We'll take what we can get.
And I mean, like 2 weeks ago was also a pretty good week, at least compared to kind of where we started. So I'm hopeful that we're going to see a lot of this. And like you said, I'm hopeful the big plays stick around because that's really what I mean, you mentioned sacks, and sacks are drive killers, but we know that explosive plays are, lead
Mm-hmm.
to a lot more scoring. And so if you're negating some of those sacks with more explosive plays, instead of just taking a sack and then throwing 2 screens and punting the ball, then like I feel a little bit better about maybe where we're going. But yeah, I wonder if it's going to be a lot more of this like boom bust kind of situation if we can't figure out the offensive line, if the quarterbacks can't stay healthy, if we can't find 32 good quarterbacks. You mentioned the Drake May thing. I'm cautiously optimistic about this because we saw with like I feel like the last couple of weeks with Brissett, there have been plays available, and that he just not there. He just can't make those plays. And I'm interested if we're going to see Drake May come out and YOLO a little bit and try to at least push the ball and make some plays. I'm not optimistic we're going to see a Patriots offense that like we're
Mm-hmm.
super excited about, but like if we get Jalen Polk, who's been running a ton of routes, Jalen Polk's been in route on like 95% of their dropbacks over the last few weeks. If we get a lot of routes out of him and we get, Drake May pushing the ball, I do wonder if we can, especially if they can concentrate that target tree around Polk, Henry, and Douglas, can we get those 3 guys at least interesting in deeper leagues? I'm hopeful that we'll see something like that.
Yeah, I think you have to be optimistic because the player we're removing from the board right now, Jacoby Brissett, was basically unplayable even in 2 QB formats. I mean, he hasn't had a week higher than QB 25 on the season, which just basically isn't usable. So at least we are hopefully replacing him with someone that can run into some random weeks, right? Like think about Bo Nix has been pretty largely the sample has been pretty bad. It's been pretty negative on Bo Nix. But he runs around and he's had a couple games where he's like turned in useful fantasy lines. Like we know Maye is going to run around and he's going to do some wild stuff. We know he's going to push the ball. So is he going to be probably a QB1 of fantasy? No, but can we run into some spot starts? Can he be usable in Q2B leagues? Can we throw some random stacks in DFS with him? Like that's what we're looking for. We're removing a player that was largely unplayable and made this whole situation kind of unplayable. And we're just hoping for something better from it. Unfortunately, the other situation, the Saints situation, might be the inverse. I think I killed the Saints. This is why you
Yeah.
don't take victory laps, guys. This is why you don't do it. You don't tweet during games in the second quarter of a game, and you're like, "Oh, I knew this guy was going to suck, so he's going to drag you into the shadow realm the second half of that game." And I killed the Saints, man. I was feeling good after 2 weeks. They look like the best offense in the NFL, and they've died. Everyone died on the Saints.
Well, and it's one of those things, like, even when you're trying not to victory lap, last week we made it very clear we were not victory lapping old running backs. And then Aaron Jones immediately goes out and gets his hip hurt, which, come back to us, Aaron Jones. We love you, Aaron Jones. But like, we were making it clear that we were not victory lapping. You don't victory lap old running backs. And still, Aaron Jones caught it, and we apologize if we had anything to do with that. One more thing before we kind of really get the show started. We got news on Thursday morning just before we started recording this. And by the way, we do this live every Thursday morning at 11:30 Eastern over at the Sharp Football Analysts YouTube. So go over to YouTube, subscribe. You'll get a notification when we go live. But we got some news that we are going to see a offensive coordinator change for the Jets. They're going to move away from Nathaniel Hackett. Nathaniel Hackett's still there. He's still the offensive coordinator, so I guess I shouldn't put it that way. But Todd Downing is going to take over and call plays. It's an interesting development, like, from a real football perspective, because it seems like, Robert Saleh was going to make this change himself, and then got fired like 10 minutes later, which is, weird that we're still going through with this process. But it is a change. It is something that the Jets are trying to do to, improve where their offense and kind of where it is. But, like, based on what we saw from Todd Downing in Tennessee, I have to seriously question about whether we're going to see a big improvement with this shift.
Yeah, I think in totality, it's not really like a big needle mover because of Downing's history, and like, it's kind of like you're not excited. I mean, and let's be real, this is Aaron Rodgers' offense. Like, we know who's really like calling the shots, and Aaron Rodgers is going to do his thing. This team's play slow. I will say, in a little bit like semi-defense of the Jets, like they haven't been great, but like they faced two teams that, when you look at their body of work, like, these are two defenses we really don't want a part of right now. Like, I don't want to play dudes against the Denver Broncos and Minnesota Vikings. Like, the Vikings have been really good defensively against everyone. They've given every quarterback they've played, like, just hell every game. And the Broncos, like you called this offseason, like, they have been an excellent defense to start the year. So they play the Bills this week. You're not genuinely excited, but I do think they're going to be able to potentially get the running game on track a little bit against the Bills. And they got the Steelers, but the rest of the schedule here, there's like not a lot you're scared of from a defensive stance on the Jets schedule. And I think that this will be better. I think they've got personnel that we believe in from at least a baseline level. Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Mike Williams, Allen Lazard. These are functional NFL players. Like, Aaron Rodgers is still a functional NFL quarterback. I think it will be better. I'm not going to push the panic button, because the defenses that they face have largely been teams that I look at when I'm writing up the worksheet. I'm like, yeah, these dudes have given everyone problems.
Yeah, I mean, even that Titans game, I mean, the Titans, we'll have to see how this kind of all shakes out. But I mean, like, I don't think the Titans defense is bad. And so you win in that game and you expect them to maybe do better than they ended up doing, but that's not a I'm trying to think of the worst defense in the league now. It used to be the Commanders. We're not there anymore. We'll talk about the Commanders later. But it's not like the Cardinals defense. It's not somebody that you're really like expecting you to go in and really crush against. So yeah, I think it's an interesting scenario. The thing, and funny I mentioned the Titans. The thing with Todd Downing is, like, we saw what that predictability was in Tennessee, and it wasn't just like the structure of calling plays. The old classic run, third down incompletion punt. It's not even just that. Like, when he would put in personnel on the field, very often he was tipping off whether they were running or passing, and he didn't really deviate from that too much. Like, there was a lot of predictability in that offense, but that's kind of what we see that's kind of what Aaron Rodgers wants to do, right? Aaron Rodgers doesn't want to have play action, and Aaron Rodgers doesn't want to use motion, and Aaron Rodgers doesn't want to do everything. He wants to sit there, read the defense, call, audible, and make checks, and he wants to throw it. And, can he still do that? The jury's out on that. It hasn't been, through 5 weeks, it hasn't been like the most promising, kind of run out for him, but we'll just have to see. I think your point really is an important point. This is Aaron Rodgers' offense. They're going to run it how Aaron Rodgers wants to run it. And ultimately that's kind of where we are. All right, let's move on. Let's do some real or fake, talk about a few players that we're thinking about moving forward. What are we going to see from them? Before we get to real or fake, though, I do want to mention running a promo on the site this week using promo code ANGLES. You can get 20% off of everything on the site. That is our betting packages from Warren Sharp, which have been outstanding this year, both from a kind of sides and totals perspective and from a props perspective. You can also get our fantasy package, which features Rich Hribar's rankings and, most importantly, his worksheet previews every single game, every single week, every fantasy relevant player every single week he writes about. That's available as part of our worksheets and our fantasy package. The best way to get ready for the week for fantasy football. There's not a better option than his worksheet previews. They're out early every week. You have everything you need to be ready for the weekend. So make sure you check those out. All right, real or fake. It's funny. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about Bucky Irving in this kind of spot, and now I think we're in a very similar spot with Tank Bigsby. And I think your analysis of the situation is probably going to be pretty similar, but it is still something. I mean, what we've seen from Bigsby, especially over the last 2 weeks, like, we certainly have to talk about the situation. Are we moving into a timeshare? But ultimately, I think your point will be, and I'm guessing based on now talking to you for a decade or whatever we've been talking to each other, your point is going to be, if this turns into a timeshare, who cares? Is that kind of where we are?
I mean, it's not like a who cares. Like, if you need a body, you need a body. I get it.
Yeah.
And like, but I think what makes this a little different than the Tampa Bay situation is that Travis Etienne's still good, and we now kind of never really have had proof that Rachaad White was good. And I think that's probably the difference. Like, when Travis Etienne's gotten the football this year, he hasn't done anything wrong. But Tank Bigsby's probably been so good with the football that he warrants more opportunities. So if he turns this into some kind of a timeshare, it ends up being the type of split where it probably hurts both players a little bit. Like, there's still a chance where, like, Bucky Irving, I think the way it's trending, can still kind of move forward. Like, and he's starting to get more and more of the work. And so, like, that one could be a situation where, like, Rachaad White ends up being like a passing down back, and like maybe there's more opportunity for Bucky Irving. I think it's hard to see a player of Travis Etienne's caliber just getting ghosted, though. And that is what kind of makes it. I would probably try to trade Bigsby off of this news. I kind of wrote that up in the worksheet a little bit. Like, obviously, if you need a body through the bye weeks, he could be a serviceable guy, but he's not catching any passes. We don't know if he has like locked in goal line work. And we have yet to see, while Travis Etienne has been healthy, or we don't really know, right? Because the coaching staff's just telling us that he needed to be removed from the games, but like, he's still playing in the games. It's a unique situation in that regards, but like, we haven't like really seen Bigsby like coexist, or like they're just constantly interchanging. It's been like Bigsby's gotten carries when like Travis Etienne's been like out of the game. So it's still nebulous. But I definitely think he's been good enough that like they probably don't want to rebottle him. Like, he's been a really good player for them when he's gotten the football. And this is an offense that is really starved for big plays right now anyway. So I think they want to incorporate him more in the offense, but I don't see a guy like Travis Etienne getting ghosted, though.
Yeah, and that's the problem. I think that was always my pushback on the Bucky Irving thing was, Rachaad White just hasn't been a good runner. He's been a very good receiving back, but like from a running perspective, that hasn't been there. And I think you're right about Etienne. My thing about this situation, I brought this up last week. I mean, I had Bigsby as an ad last week too. My kind of thing about this situation is, we saw in week 1 Tank Bigsby also get a reasonably large share of the carries, and then he had his own shoulder injury and we saw him disappear, right? And so it's kind of that, to your point, that leads into this kind of nebulous nature of the situation. Maybe if Bigsby doesn't get hurt in week 1, this is just what we've seen the whole season, and that's kind of an interesting situation. From the Etienne point of view, one of the selling points for him, for drafting him where people were drafting him, was this idea that he was going to be the clear number one running back, because that's what he was last year, and you got that kind of workload out of him. And if you're not getting that kind of workload out of him, then it's really a big problem for him, and it's really a big issue. And yeah, I mean, if you can trade Etienne at this point, that is something I'd be interested in doing. Someone did offer me Travis Etienne as part of a package, like literally this morning, and I hit reject as fast as I've hit anything reject ever before in my life. And I think that ultimately that's kind of where we are. Is I think that maybe this works out for Bigsby, and obviously injuries can happen. Etienne's shoulder, we don't know what's going on. But if both of them are healthy, maybe this works out for Bigsby. Maybe he gets enough carries. But ultimately, this feels like a bigger negative for Etienne than it does like we're going to see Bigsby come and be a fantasy starter or running back 2 every single week. And that's just another annoying thing that we have to deal with in this really annoying running back landscape. And
there's a lot of these spots, man. There are a lot of these where, like, if your guy doesn't score a touchdown, like, he's not very good.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen that yet with Brian Robinson, but because he keeps scoring a touchdown every week, but he's in that boat. Like, we got all these guys that are in that like same bucket. We have very few bell cows, and we're kind of there. But I mean, yeah. I mean, we're in the bye weeks though. Like, we're in the heart of the bye weeks, and there's only 2 teams on bye next week. Then week 8, there's nobody. But like, you got to be aggressive and shop these guys. Like, if you had a Bigsby on your bench and you don't need him, like you've got to package him with another player to a team that has a dude on bye this week, or doesn't lost Jonathan Taylor, or still doesn't have Joe Mixon back. You got to take Bigsby and another player and try to pluck away a dude from their team. Like this is the time to be aggressive with those types of things.
And I think there's a question in here. Don't you think that Tank's touches and stats last week, because he played the 32 ranked defense that was decimated by injury, and that is certainly fair. Although I will say,
We have other
Indianapolis's
touches this
rush.
season from him. Like it's not just last week. Every time Tank Bigsby's played and gotten the football, he's been good.
So that was my point. The first point is I don't know if the Colts run defense, and you're right that they're hurt, and so that's take it. But like that Packers game lives large in our mind, but otherwise it hadn't been that bad. But I think that was my bigger point is we saw in week 1 against the Dolphins him get touches and him be good.
Yeah, the Texans the week before.
We saw against the Texans he had a couple big runs as well. So I think that's like there was a reason why Bigsby's been in my waiver column twice already this year before last week, right? This wasn't just a last week kind of thing. We've seen this. And that was my overall point, is that when Bigsby has been healthy, we've seen more of a split already. So regardless of what you think of Etienne's shoulder injury, if that's the cause, I still keep going back to that week 1 game, and I try to figure out what we're looking at here. One more question here from the chat. Have James Cook, David Montgomery, and Jordan Mason. What should I do with Mason? Should I try to replace him? I really am interested in this question because of the Mason part about it. Because it seems like the news we get out of Christian McCaffrey, like if you had asked me 3 weeks ago if Christian McCaffrey was going to play again this season, I'd have leaned towards no. After like the whole like Germany thing, I was like, oh, this is not great. But the news we're getting now seems to be pretty good, that we might be seeing McCaffrey again. And if we see McCaffrey again, that's the end of the road for Jordan Mason. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the bench. We'll see you on the bench later. And so I think that you should probably try to move him. But my thought would be, if you're playing in a competitive league with people paying attention, they also have seen this. So I don't really know what you're getting out of this if you're trying to move him.
Yeah, that Mason's a tough one. I mean, I'm someone, and I wrote about this in the offseason too. Like, I just wish we would have known the severity of McCaffrey's kind of like where he was at. But like, I tend to take the other approach with like guys that are injured. Like, I know a lot of people are gonna be excited when Christian McCaffrey comes back, but like I'm like these guys that are hurt, like I'm not too like optimistic on like these guys coming back and being incredible or great fantasy assets. Like I think it's better to proceed in caution with these situations than the other way. So I'm always going to like operate in that lane. So until he's on the field and he's playing, I'm still just treating it like, I don't know, man, it feels like up in the air. So, and the news has changed with McCaffrey, literally, like you kind of hinted at, like every week it changes. So who knows, right, at this point. But I would definitely, if you have depth at running back and you have other needs, like, yeah, you can shop those guys around. I mean, you don't necessarily have to move a specific player. It could be kind of who the other gamer wants to, find a beneficial path for both teams. Like that's how you make successful trades. It's not about just dumping Jordan Mason.
Well, yeah, but obviously, if you can just dump Jordan Mason and get a great, I mean, you should do that. If someone's willing, someone's giving you Jamar Chase for Jordan Mason, I feel pretty good about that situation. You mentioned injuries. We should talk about the injury to Michael Pittman. Looks, he's going to miss time. Could end up on injured reserve, which obviously opens up a big spot for these Colts wide receivers and kind of those secondary wide receivers. We saw last week what we expected to happen with Joe Flacco in at quarterback last week is exactly what happened. We got exactly what we wanted kind of out of that situation, both from Flacco and from Josh Downs and from, Alex Pierce and all of those guys. And so Pittman got found in the end zone. So everything kind of worked out there. Moving forward, you don't just have, though, the Pittman injury. You also have the specter of Anthony Richardson's going to be back, maybe even this week. I would bet he's going to be back this week. And so we now have a situation of, we see Richardson coming back, right? We know that passing game is going to inherently be lower volume with Richardson there. It's probably going to be less successful from a passing perspective, even if Richardson brings, other things that make that offense interesting. From a passing perspective, it's going to be less effective. And so now you're looking at this, okay, Pittman is gone, but what are we really getting out of these wide receivers? How excited can I be about Josh Downs, who, by the way, is also hurt and also missed practice on Wednesday? Yeah. How excited can I be about Josh Downs if he's connected to Richardson instead of being connected to Flacco? So it's a really interesting situation, I think.
Yeah, I think you kind of covered it. It's going to be volatile. It's going to be a situation where you get frustrated. There's going to be spike weeks for these guys. I mean, I will say this is a nice Madden roster. Like I would like if you were to have a wide receiver trio like Adonai Mitchell, Alec Pierce, and Josh Downs look pretty good. Like if you like this is how the
Feel great.
archetype
Yeah.
this is the archetype of dudes you would want, right? Like this is like I bet the Colts. I don't play online Madden anymore, but I bet the Colts are a pretty fun team in online Madden, especially with Jonathan Taylor when he's healthy in your lineup. But I mean, yeah, these guys are all volatile. We've seen just the splits from Anthony Richardson. I mean, he's just been such an inaccurate quarterback on his NFL sample. And this is why like teams didn't aggressively pursue Joe Flacco, right? Like this is the world you live in when you have a young quarterback that is volatile, and then you have a guy like Joe Flacco come in and looks good, and you've got a chance to win games. And then if Anthony Richardson comes back and he stinks again, the first question Shane Steichen's going to get after the game is something about Joe Flacco starting. And like this is the world we live in. That's why the Browns jettisoned Flacco or didn't bring him back. They didn't jettison him, they didn't just bring him back. And that's why teams are probably a little bit reluctant to grab him when you have these young quarterbacks, because when you have these veterans and they play well, the fan base and PR, from a PR perspective, they're like, why isn't that guy playing and helping us win games? When obviously the big picture is to get Anthony Richardson playing time, a guy that literally has 19 starts since high school. And you got to kind of go through these growing pains with him and kind of go through this. So, yeah, I will say from DFS, we do get another week of Flacco. This situation becomes interesting. Obviously, Adonai Mitchell, Josh Downs, those guys become really interesting in DFS this week if we get one more week of Flacco. So that's kind of just how I'm treating it, is just like playing it by ear, seeing what quarterback we have.
And that's actually, we got a comment in here. Two-part question. Is it officially AD Mitchell season? And why do you agree that it definitely is AD Mitchell season? Which I do agree. Like he's the interesting one for me here, because he was working a lot from the slot early in the season because they didn't have Downs, right? But over the
Mhm.
last several weeks, he's been working out wide, including last week he earned 7 targets against Jaguars. He's been targeted on 30% of his routes so far this season, which again, he hasn't run that many routes, and so there is a little bit of noise in that and a little bit of variance, but it was still 21% of his routes even when he was a full-time player the first 2 games. With Pittman out, I think we're going to see Mitchell be more of that kind of full-time player. And then ultimately, and this is the conversation you and I have had several times, so we don't need to belabor it. Ultimately, I just think AD Mitchell's a very good player, and I think he's going to be a good player and have a good career. And ultimately, if we're getting a good player, I think he's going to have a good career getting into a full-time role. Yeah, I'm very interested in that. And so with this Pittman injury, we'll see what happens with Downs. We still don't even really know what that injury is. Especially if Downs is out, yeah, I'm going to be very interested in Mitchell, even if Richardson's in there. Because the thing about Alex Pierce is we know who Alex Pierce is. He's going to get a handful of targets. If like last week they hit, he's going to have a massive game. If they don't hit, he's probably going to goose egg for you. That's like kind of where we are with Alex Pierce. I don't expect that to really change. I see Mitchell as that guy that could really step in and be more of that, that guy that's going to command a bunch of targets. And if that ends up happening, especially if Mitchell is the player I think he is, and I hope that he is, then we're going to be pretty excited about that. So yeah, I definitely agree that definitely is, to answer your question, Shepherdtorius. All right. Let's talk about a few more here with DeAndre Swift. Yeah, we got to do DeAndre Swift, who DeAndre Swift's had a really fun fantasy take year, because like, the thing with DeAndre Swift, if you are there for like in August, you were saying, are we sleeping on DeAndre Swift? I think that was a fair take. I was kind of in that boat a little bit with Swift, and then we get through the first 3 weeks, and you go, I mean, can they even keep playing Swift? We all have to pick up Rashawn Johnson. And now we've had the last 2 weeks of DeAndre Swift. We're back to, all right, I guess we're just starting DeAndre Swift every week. And it's so weird because he's had his breakout, but I don't even really think he's been that great in those games. He's gotten a lot of work. I don't know how good he's been. It came against 2 teams you would expect him to do well against. You would expect the Bears to be able to run against. But on the other hand, in those 2 weeks, he's dominated the work. And if it weren't for a little bit of bad scoring luck, being like tackled at the 1 and giving opportunities to Roschon Johnson, 2 of those Roschon Johnson touchdowns probably should have been DeAndre Swift touchdowns, then like his weeks look even better than they have been. So it's just, I don't really know what to do with DeAndre Swift at this point. And he's getting a tougher matchup this week, at least as against the run. I guess we'll have to see how real this is, but it's an odd situation, Rich, that I'm not really sure what to do with.
I mean, he's a guy I think you take the small little burst and you try to use it as a jump off point. And again, it's easy for me to say to sell a guy when I don't know in your league like what the context is of what roster he's on and what roster you can move him to. He does have a couple of nice games come up. He's on bye next week after the London game, and then they got Commanders and Cardinals. But then the rest of his schedule looks pretty bad. Like the rest of the Bears schedule down the stretch looks pretty rough. I mean, that like gauntlet, like from Thanksgiving on of like Vikings, Lions, 49ers, Vikings, Lions, don't look too good. That don't look too good. Where I'm going to be chasing a lot of DeAndre Swift, games. What you do like from him though is that he's been involved in the pass game a little bit and he's gotten some explosives, right? And that's kind of like what his out always was to like this point in his career, is that he was a guy that could get you some explosives in the pass game. And he's had a couple of those off some nice screens the last couple of weeks. But this is a run game I expect to, when they face tougher opponents, to kind of have issues going forward. The Bears are a team too. We should expect to get a little better as things kind of go on. Caleb's gotten a little better every week, and Shane Waldron had like probably his first good game last week as a play caller. They ran a lot more 11 personnel than they had in previous weeks, so that's like a positive sign. But we're not going to put all our eggs in the Shane Waldron basket and say he's figured anything out either. But my top down take is I would use this to sell him if I can. It's easier for me to say that without knowing the specific context, but I'm probably out big picture.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I am with it as well. But I do think, I mean, the takeaway here I have is that he has established himself as the clear number one. Like, we're not seeing any of Khalil Herbert anymore. Which, please, Bears, trade Khalil Herbert. Please just trade him somewhere. Please trade him to the Cowboys. Love that. Trade him to the Cowboys. I would be all in on that. But we've seen him do that. Rashawn Johnson is. It seems like he's going to be a part of it. But if we're talking about just kind of like who is the number one back, that has been Swift. And ultimately, if that's the case, and if we're going to continue to see that split, that at least is useful in the running back landscape as it currently sits. If we're going to trust Swift to get those carries. All right, let's talk about a few of the games. You brought up the Commanders, and that is one of the more interesting games of the week. The Commanders at the Ravens. Ravens 6.5-point favorites, a 51.5-point total. Which if you told us, I mean, Ravens 6.5-point favorites, that's not very far away from maybe what we'd expected before the beginning of the season. But if you had told me, like, coming into this game that I kind of like the Commanders, I think they might have a shot going up against the Ravens. If you had told me that ahead of week one, like, I wouldn't have believed it at all. They've been such a surprise team. That defense still hasn't even really been very good. But what we've seen from Jaden Daniels and his ability to lead this offense, to get them scoring points, like, you really love that. And on the other side of it, I mean, this Ravens secondary, we've seen them get exploited, especially last week against the Bengals. And we went into that Bengals game, and that Bengals game is really important for, I think, our conversation here, because we went into that Bengals game expecting them to be able to run on the Cincinnati defense, because the Cincinnati defense hadn't stopped the run all year. But ultimately, we ended up in a Lamar game, in a passing game, and a passing game script, because they had to, because they just couldn't stop Joe Burrow. And I wonder if, even though the Commanders have been really bad against the run, and they've been awful against the run. 20.9% of the running back carries against Washington have gained at least 10 yards. The Eagles are second worst in that metric, and they're at 15.4%. So, like, they're 25% worse than the second worst team when we're talking about giving up big runs. They're going to a first down or touchdown on 30% of the running back carries against, which is the third worst in the league. The Commanders' run defense has been bad, and if Derrick Henry is able to just kind of run over these dudes, we could end up with another kind of Ravens dropping back to throw 35% of the time kind of game script, which obviously is going to be great for Zay Jones and, not Zay Jones, recently unsuspended Zay Jones, but Zay Flowers and, Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely and Justice Hill and all of those guys. But also we could see the other end of this, where the Commanders just are able to move the ball on the Ravens like the Bengals were, and we get that Jackson game. And so it really creates a lot of variance and variability in this matchup.
This game was fun. Crab cakes in football, baby. Maryland football is back. I know Washington doesn't count it, but they're close enough, right? It's a fun area game. They're in proximity of each other. And writing this game up was fun. I mean, you got the number one offense, the number two offense in the NFL, and then you have two defenses that really aren't good. The Ravens have flirted like at times of like, have they turned the corner defensively? And then they just like have like a quarter where they just like give up the bag, like against the Cowboys. And then last week, the entire game. What you love about the Ravens, though, is that they showed like they are still multidimensional. And no matter how the game script goes, like this team can run through Lamar Jackson through the run game or go through Lamar Jackson in the passing game, which happened last week. And it was a nice reminder to see still too that like Derrick Henry, like he still is an archetype of a running back that is fragile. Now this is a spot 7-point home favorite, like 6.5-point home favorite against a bad run defense. Like everything objectively points to Derrick Henry, but like we saw against the Bengals, like when they have to throw, he's not in the game. Justice Hill played that entire second half of that game, and nobody was getting Derrick Henry points in that game. So that still exists in the range of outcome where a little bit there is some fragility, with the guy that Derrick Henry is. He still is game script dependent. Again, this is a game script you expect for him. But the Commanders, we should have faith in this offense. I mean, I kind of wanted to see how they were going to perform last week against the Browns. A defense that can create pressure, give, quarterbacks trouble. And they did give Jaden Daniels a little bit of trouble. Like they were in more third downs and he had his lowest completion rate. But dude, they still scored a bucket of points. They're up 24-3 at the half. We're up 30 early. Like we should believe it. Like until the Commanders give us a reason not to, like we should believe that this team can move the football. So this is what makes this game really fun because neither defense has been particularly good. Both offenses have been excellent. From a DFS perspective, obviously this is going to be a real hot, like 1 o'clock game. I love both quarterbacks. We like, Derrick Henry. We like Zay Flowers. And Zay Flowers is an interesting guy because we're going to have like these spikes, right? Like the inverse of Derrick Henry. Like when the Ravens are clicking and they're running the RPO stuff and they're just moving downhill, you have those games like weeks 3 and 4 where like there's just not enough dropbacks for Zay Flowers. But anytime the Ravens have had to throw, I mean, he's had double-digit targets every game they've had like a passing script. So the matchups there again for Zay Flowers, he's a frustrating, probably we're going to have frustrating weeks with him. He's going to have weeks where he has the 2 catches for 30 yards, but he's looked excellent and he's clearly been the number 1 target in the offense anytime they've had to throw at any type of volume.
Yeah, and I think that's really my point about this game is that which of these games are we going to see from the Ravens? Because if we trust the Commanders offense, even if we trust the Commanders offense and we, they're able to score, 3 touchdowns, but Derrick Henry has like 3 long runs and like puts the game away, how much of this are we going to see? How much passing are we going to see? And so I think that how much passing are we going to see from the Ravens is ultimately going to be the question throughout the entire season as we kind of move through these teams. And ultimately, that doesn't matter so much for Lamar Jackson because Lamar Jackson can get there running the football or he can get there throwing the football. So ultimately, you don't really have to stack Lamar with anybody. Like Lamar is one of those quarterbacks that you can just run out there naked in DFS and be perfectly happy to do so. But if I'm trying to build stacks around, Flowers or Bateman, if we expect them to throw a lot, Bateman has gotten targets whenever they've thrown a lot. We've seen that. He's got 5 targets, 4 targets, and 8 targets in the 3 games in which they've had at least a 57% drop back rate. And we'll see Bateman missed, Wednesday's practice. And with Bateman's history, we'll see what happens there. But so like there are options in here that we can get excited about. We've seen when they've wanted to throw the ball, we've seen that has been a lot more Isaiah Likely than Mark Andrews or, Charlie Kohler, I guess. Turns his 6 routes into 4 targets. Was that what it was? Did he run 6 routes and have 4 targets? Is that what we saw?
And that's the thing with the Ravens. Like when it comes to touchdowns, that's what makes it hard from like a DFS stacking purposes. Their touchdowns actually do get spread around in the passing game. Like you might have like a week where Aguilar scores a touchdown, and then you have Collar scoring a touchdown, or Bateman scores a touchdown. Right? Andrews should have had a touchdown last week. It was one of the few bad throws Lamar made. He was wide open on that wheel route. I will say Andrews continues to pass the eye test to me, and I don't know anything, but like I don't see like anything physically wrong with him. It's just he's not out there. Likely's ran more pass routes 3 games in a row than him. So like we just have to believe that Likely's ahead of him.
Yeah, that's the tough spot. And then ultimately, and I guess this will be the last time I make this point because I think I've said it 5 weeks in a row now. If I feel like, but I don't know. Good luck. Guess what they're going to have to throw or not. Yeah. If they are, you're going to like what you see from Flowers weeks. And Likely.
Yeah.
Yep. That's where we are. On the Washington side, I'm glad you brought up Brian Robinson. So Brian Robinson, I believe he DNP'd again on Wednesday with his knee injury. He obviously had issues leading into last week. We saw him get 2 touchdowns last week, if I'm remembering correctly. But, he didn't get a ton of work. We saw a lot of Austin Eckler in the second half of the game. And if I'm looking at this situation, then this really feels like a Austin Eckler kind of game, even if we're not talking about the injury to Brian Robinson. And so I am interested a lot in Austin Eckler this week and kind of what we're going to end up getting out of him.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this Washington run game against this Ravens run defense, which has been really good this year. But the Washington might also have a run game that is just kind of universally good, even regardless of the matchup, because of the Jaden Daniels factor and what they're able to do. And this goes back to Cliff in Arizona. When Cliff was in Arizona, he didn't do a particularly good job as a head coach, but that run game was really good. And the way he adapted that run game in Arizona was really good around Kyler Murray and James Conner. It had success, and that's kind of what's bled into the start of this season. So, I mean, when you look at the Ravens and how they defended the run, you'd say, oh man, like, I don't want to play any of these running backs against them. But maybe the Commanders' run game is just one that is going to kind of regularly get there because of the scheme and the players that they have and the mobile quarterback. It's able to kind of combat these spots. The health is the issue with some of these guys, right? Like Brian Robinson didn't practice yesterday. He basically didn't practice all last week. The second that they were up, they got him out. He didn't play a snap in the second half. Eckler didn't practice yesterday too. That could just be kind of maintenance, Wednesday practices or whatever. You always want to follow these things on Thursday, Friday, especially for veterans like Eckler. And then like Jerry McNichols has been effective when he's played in the second half of these games. Like he can rotate into this thing.
Yep.
So what you have here with the Commanders is you need these guys are living off of touchdowns. Like they're all sharing enough touches. And then so you need these guys to get in the end zone. And that makes it frustrating for fantasy and really hard to latch onto because the weeks they don't get touchdowns, you're going to be like, oh, cool. I got 55 yards without a touchdown, So that's what makes it hard with these guys.
So 2 weeks ago, I think Jeremy McNichols scored 2 touchdowns in a week that I was heavy Brian Robinson, and I think that that's finally the thing that broke me in DFS. I think that it's been coming for a year or so, but I think that that was the one. Him scoring that second touchdown ahead of Brian Robinson, who I had pretty much everywhere and was having a pretty good week 2 weeks ago. I think that was the one, Rich. Ever since then, I think that I've been completely broken from a DFS perspective. So thank you, Jeremy McNichols. I'm happy to see you. I'm happy to see you playing better. The ghost of we've had some weird fantasy dynasty ghosts like this year just randomly showing up places. I mean Juju Smith-Schuster we're not going to talk about because the Chiefs are on bye this week, but like he's just how many dynasty rosters was he finally dropped from this off season that he had just kind of been on, and we lived through the Patriots year and people were just finally done with him, and then all of a sudden here we are with Juju Smith-Schuster. It's just like, and there are other ones that I'm not even remembering right now. They're just dynasty
Kareem Hunt, they're all in the Chiefs.
Yeah, Kareem Hunt. Yeah, that's one. The ghost of dynasty fantasy football rosters are coming back for sure.
J.K. Dobbins is back. Like it's like
Dobbins. There you go. There's another. All right, let's talk about the Amir Abdullah. That's the one on top of my head. We finally got the Amir Abdullah year 10 breakout last week. Last week is when we got with Abdullah. All right, let's move on to talk about the Lions and the Cowboys. Lions at the Cowboys. Detroit 3-point road favorites in this game. We expect this to obviously be a big game. I'm sorry, Marcos. I see in the chat. Marco's got another one in the chat. Sterling Shepard. How could we forget?
Yeah,
Sterling Shepard is back, baby. Sterling Shepard is back. So in this Cowboys game, we got 52.5 is the total. Obviously, we're expecting a pretty big game here. The narrative here will be Goff's playing, indoors, and people like Goff indoors. I think that you consistently have pointed out the actual narrative here is Goff getting pressured, and if this was the fully intact Dallas Cowboys defense, we would probably be a little bit worried about that. But, Lawrence is not going to be there. Doesn't look like Parsons is going to be there. Nealand is out as well. Like, this could be a really, really great situation for Jared Goff, not getting a ton of pressure against this Cowboys secondary that has been suspect all year long.
Yeah, I think from a DFS angle, this game makes me nervous because there are going to be some popular pieces in this game, especially guys like Jalen Tolbert and Jake Ferguson are tracking to be really popular this week. But I go back to week 2, I believe it was. Yeah, it was week 2 when the Cowboys were home dogs to the Ravens, and the Ravens just came in and ran them, like just ran the ball ad nauseum on them. And I worry that exists in a range of outcomes here with the status of this front seven for the Cowboys, because they ain't facing the Steelers, right? Like, especially a Steelers unit that's missing 3 starters in the offensive line. Like, the Lions are going to come in and run the football on you. And I worry that we get a similar game like that where the Lions are just able to run the football. they're getting enough stops on defense. Like this game just ultimately doesn't get there. Now there is also an alternative range of outcomes where like, the Lions are scoring points and they're forcing the Cowboys to score points. We get the bonanza, right? It's just, I'm a little nervous to go all in on this game because of the status of this Cowboy defense and the fact that we know the Lions in their heart of hearts want to line up and just bully you around the yard. And I worry that exists for this
to kind of jump off that a little bit though, like that leads us to what we saw last week. And it didn't 100% work out for us last week because we didn't get the touchdowns we needed from Josh Jacobs. But that was always our thing about that Packers and Cardinals game is, I mean, you're going to get excited about Jordan Love. And you're going to get excited about, Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks and all of that. But like there's an other side of this game where it's just that Josh Jacobs has a really good game and maybe we don't get that explosion. And so it seems like you could do the same thing in DFS here with David Montgomery, with Jahmyr Gibbs, which I mean, I'd like to see some targets for Jahmyr Gibbs, but ultimately you could do that here. And so that seems like a very, very easy and understandable kind of pivot off of what I assume will be very popular Amon-Ra St. Brown, like you said, Jalen Tolbert and Jake Ferguson and all of those kind of guys.
Yeah, I mean, Amon-Ra's been a tough guy for a DFS perspective. Like he's been completely fine from like where you draft him and you're getting these productions. But from like a DFS perspective at his price, like he's just giving you like really good games. He's not like doing what Jamar Chase did last week, where like you're getting like those just absolute haymakers. Maybe we get one this week. But again, the signal to me is like, if you're going to play this thing creatively, like you probably want to do something with the Lions running backs. They are number one in the NFL too in opportunities per game. So you can maybe do something cute with both of these guys. The problem, like you kind of hinted at though, is like they're getting a lot of carries and like we need those receptions to kind of be there. Cause those are the things that like from a fantasy football perspective, outside of touchdowns, like really kind of have like those high cholesterol touches for the running backs, right? Like we want those catches.
Those tallow touches, as we call them. Get those catches. And we just haven't seen that from Jahmyr Gibbs recently. It's not something we really expect to see from David Montgomery. We haven't seen it from Gibbs recently. It's been odd. It's hard for me to put my finger on why that's been happening. Do you have any kind of theories, thoughts on why we're just not getting that kind of work from Jahmyr Gibbs?
My only thing I can say is just the volume, right? Like this is a team that, hasn't had to throw a lot of passes since the opening 2 weeks. Because they've been able to play kind of their game. That's really the only thing I can say. And then you obviously we have the third target right in the offense now, where last year we didn't, and Jameson Williams' targets have gone down every week, but he still is like playing. He's a full-time player and he's able to earn targets. So that's really all I can say. I don't know if it's a one thing. I think he will catch passes as the season goes on, but zero catches the last 2 games.
It's not ideal. Not ideal. You wrote up in the worksheet a little bit about Sam Laporta and maybe feeling better about what we saw from him, back before the bye. So is this a spot? Obviously, the entire Lions passing game could do really good in this, and so this is not like one of those. Is this a spot? But why do you feel maybe a little bit better about what we saw from him? Back before the bye.
We saw a little bit of stuff scheme for him in that game, but I mean, he had a good matchup in this spot last year and was effective. The Cowboys have been soft to open the year to tight ends. So if you'd say this is a spot to get him involved, it would be. But again, if Jared Goff has 20 dropbacks in this game, like it's hard for everyone to get there. Like because we know Amon-Ra, like out of the 20 dropbacks, like Amon-Ra is getting like 8 of those targets, like basically by default, because of how this offense works. And that's what's been kind of the problem. I mean, we were on it all off season. Like we talked about Laporta, and even if you go back to last year, he only went over 60 yards 4 times last year. He had all those touchdowns and we haven't had a touchdown from him this year. So that's kind of where we are with him. But like, he's one of these guys, when you look at his usage, like you're just like, I have to keep playing him, right? Like this isn't a Mark Andrews situation where like the guy's not playing. I mean, what are your alternatives? And maybe you did pick up a Tucker Kraft and you'd rather play Tucker Kraft and ride this wave. That's cool. But like, you're not streaming for Sam Laporta. Like you're not picking up Hunter Henry for him. You're not going to play Tyler Conklin for him, right? Like, so it's just a world where you're in with some of these guys at tight end that we know are talented. They're an offenses we believe in. We just haven't had the results.
And it's so funny. Like we were there with Kyle Pitts last week. And then, we kind of talked about our overall takeaway was the same. Like, well, he's getting targets and what else are you going to do? I had mentioned that I'm starting Tucker Kraft over him in a league. And that, by the way, worked out for me. That worked out just fine. So it was fine. Right. And so that ended up working out. But I think that like we're in that same spot with Laporta, as we're saying.
And Kincaid too. Kincaid is right there. Like it's the same stuff every week, right? Like
and then we saw the idea with Pitts last week that it ended up working out for him, right? And so ultimately, we're going to end up with that game from Laporta. And I think that your point is really important for Laporta is that we haven't seen the touchdowns. He relied a lot on touchdowns last year. We would expect the kind of player he is that he's going to be utilized in those areas, and we're going to expect some touchdowns to come for him. And when those touchdowns come for him, you're going to be really happy with what you got. But ultimately, that was the concern, as you mentioned. That was the concern we both had in the offseason, is if these touchdowns aren't here, is he going to end up with that line that Travis Kelce had on Monday night? I don't know how often that we're going to see that kind of thing. So I think that that's an important point.
And what's funny
You
is,
brought up,
we're only 6 weeks into the season 5. This will be the third of the way through. And I go back to I write those team regression articles every offseason. And it's easy to get enamored with players and player talent, but I keep thinking about there was 4 teams that constantly popped and all like regularly. It was the 49ers, the Lions, the Dolphins, and the Cowboys. Like, they were 4 teams that just popped and everything like this. They're going to regress this year. And regression works in mysterious ways. Obviously, the Dolphins lost Tua, but we've seen with the 49ers and Lions, like, they just aren't running as hot as they did last year with the same players in the field. Like, and the Cowboys have lost some pieces too. But like, all 4 of those teams have been like nails. Like, they've regressed. And like, we've seen it to play out to start the season.
Yeah, Warren actually wrote on the site this week about the red zone struggles that we've seen out of the 49ers. And it's just, yeah, they were really good in the red zone last year, and it hasn't happened this year. And that's kind of what you write about, as you mentioned, every single summer, looking at these teams that overperformed in those areas and see if they can do that. We see the same thing with the Cowboys defense. They obviously lost Dan Quinn, they lost a lot of pieces, but what they were able to do with Dan Quinn for several years in a row was really overachieve from a turnover perspective, and that really helped them kind of look like the defense that they were. And so, like, can that just continue? And so it's those regression questions. It's probably going to come back most times, and we've seen that. But again, I would say we expect the 49ers to be better moving forward, right? And so it's like one of those things. We're going to find our happy median here.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to ask you, you brought up Jalen Tolbert. Jalen Tolbert is going to be, very popular this week, and understandably so. The Cowboys need that number 3 option. I do wonder how all in are you going to go on Tolbert here? Because it does seem like we're just waiting for that like 15 target CeeDee Lamb game. It's kind of what it seems like to me. And so I wonder if this kind of target tree does condense more around Ferguson and Lamb, even being that number 3 wide receiver, as he just kind of turned into Brandon Cooks last year, where you're hoping for a touchdown? Or are we hoping that Tolbert can maybe be more than that? Is he finally breaking out? This is a guy that we have been waiting on for a long time. Speaking of kind of the ghosts of dynasty fantasy football rosters.
Yeah, I mean, he's a year 3 wide receiver. Sometimes it takes a little bit. He's a smaller school prospect. I mean, I go back to my pre-draft write-ups on him, and I mean, he had some positive traits, so maybe it's coming together. So I want to be optimistic, especially in this Cowboys offense that we know is going to have to drop back a lot, basically over the course of the season. It's promising how Rico Dowdle's played the last 2 weeks, but this is a team that's going to be a pass-first team largely the remainder of the season. So there's going to be opportunity for him to run routes and get targets. So we feel good about that, and we were waiting on the CeeDee Lamb 15 target game, but like, maybe it stays kind of neutral and things get spread around. We like too that Tolbert isn't doing the Brandon Cooks role. He's moving around. They're moving around. He's played inside the slot too these last 2 weeks. So we like that. So I do want to be optimistic. Will say, I don't know how many more games we're going to get going forward where he out targets both Lamb and Jake Ferguson like he did last week. But I do kind of want to at least say that he's like on the board, right? And like, this was kind of always my thing when we go back to the Noah Brown like argument we had, is like, these types of guys always come up during the season. Like, these guys, like, they just always pop up, like, especially at wide receiver more than running back. And he's just going to be in one of these like buckets, like, where we say like, all right, we're going to pick this dude up. How confident are we playing him weekly? I think this is a spot, if you grabbed him, I think you go back to him as like a wide receiver 3, like flex type of guy, because they're going to have to throw in this game. We know that we saw Kenneth Walker have a successful game against the Lions a couple weeks ago, but like, Rico Dowdle's not creating the types of runs that Kenneth Walker was creating in that game, where he's getting suplexed and landing on his feet and like and cutting across the field and has a 20-yard touchdown run, but he ran 75 yards on the play. Like, Rico's not doing that. So it's going to be a really pass-heavy script. I would expect the Cowboys wide receivers to be really involved in this game. So I would go right back to him this week.
If you had asked me 3 weeks ago, we had two kind of like mini arguments in one show about the most absurd players to have arguments about, Rico Dowdle and Noah Brown. And if you'd asked me 3 weeks ago which one of those I'd feel better about heading into week 6, it definitely would have been Noah Brown and not Rico Dowdle. But here we are. Here we are with Rico Dowdle becoming the lead running back of the Cowboys, the clear lead running back.
Yeah.
So, what are we going to do?
They keep playing Hunter Luepke a little more than any of us want, but like this Hunter Luepke thing is like it's like a real thing that they're doing.
Yeah. The Hunter Luepke touchdowns to come are going to be really fun and not tilting at all for any of us. I did want to talk about this this Arizona and Green Bay game. We're not going to have a ton of time to talk about it. I could just bring up that Michael Wilson, by the way, getting an odd number of targets recently, and is a interesting player, another young player that I'm interested in. But we'll put him off to the side there. But that Packers wide receiver situation, it's funny. People were really disappointed by what we saw from Dontavian Wicks last week. I go from the other perspective because I'm focusing on opportunity. The opportunity that we saw from Dontavian Wicks is exactly what we wanted. It just didn't work out. Yeah. We know that he's had some issues with his efficiency and catching the football and stuff like that. But the question is, moving forward, are we going to continue to see that? And I don't know. I mean, Watson was limited in practice on Wednesday. Romeo Doubs is likely back. We'll see. That situation's odd, right? But he's likely back. And I do wonder if it's kind of one of those situations where we got our 1 week of Dontavian Wicks usage. It wasn't as exciting as we wanted, and now we're just going to go back to kind of where we are with Wicks. And that's disappointing to me if that's what we ended up. So I guess I just wanted to say I'm disappointed if that's what we're getting out of Wicks. One comment here in the Michael Wilson's getting targets as Trey McBride has been out. That was true 2 weeks ago, but even last week with McBride back, he had 20% of the targets, and he was targeted on like 21% of his routes or something like that from Mile High Luke. So, and then not last week, the week before that, it was pretty good as well. And I know McBride left that game, but yeah, there was some promising stuff about Wilson last week. But again, I would expect with Wilson that we're going to see, again, just like with Dallas and Ferguson and CeeDee Lamb, I would expect in Arizona we're going to see most of the targets go to Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. But I do still think it's interesting that Wilson, a younger player that we did have some excitement about, when he's still getting kind of some of these targets, and like I said, he got it last week as well. I don't know. It's interesting to me. He was somebody I thought about for Uncut Gems, I would say. Not who I went with Uncut Gems. Talking
that passing game scares me going forward, though, the Cardinals. Yeah. I've been kind of down on it to this point of the season. I think I wrote up pretty lengthy. I actually sent the tweet, because if you don't subscribe, I did send the tweet about the write-up on Marvin Harrison's usage. And their schedule kind of the rest of the way after this week looks really rough. Like I think Kyler Murray is a pretty clear sell candidate for me.
Interesting.
Like if you have him, I mean, their remaining schedule is awful. Like it looks really bad. So I'm nervous. I think James Conner is the only piece I really have confidence in this offense, and he'll probably end up missing a month at some point. But I've been down on Drew Petzing's passing game creativity the entire season. I don't see it still. And then the schedule is about to really ramp up for them.
What you wrote about in the Marvin Harrison usage and just kind of what we're seeing from him, down the field and stuff like that has been very disappointing. I would say, and especially for
because the way Neighbors is getting used, because they'll always be compared.
Yeah, it's disappointing. I hope we see better, but I do like what we saw from Petzing last year, and what he was able to do last year was really impressive. A lot of it was from
the run game. It's all run game stuff.
And the run game has kept working. So that is a fair point. Maybe just the pass game isn't there, but I don't know. He seems, if you can do that in the running game, I hope that we can make some adjustments, and we'll see what happens. But I think your point is fair. All right, we're gonna have to get out of here. So let's move on to our Uncut Gems. Again, these are players that might not even be rostered in a lot of leagues, players that maybe people aren't very interested in this week, that we think are going to have a good game. We did well last week. We did really well last week with Trevor Lawrence. Came out, had like the QB4 game or something like that. Feeling great about what we saw last week. So we gotta repeat the feat here, Rich. So who do you got with our Uncut Gems?
Yeah. You've been doing well in these all year. I'm going to do something Trevor Lawrence adjacent, kind of, for the reasons why we chose Trevor Lawrence. And I'm not going to choose Will Levis because I actually went under the hood, and like all the stuff that like we liked for Trevor Lawrence in that Gus Bradley matchup, Will Levis has been kind of really bad in all those spots. But I'm going to go with DeAndre Hopkins as kind of my guy coming out of the bye, looking for him to kind of be more of a full-time player out of the bye. He has been the best receiver even before the bye. He leads the Titans in yards per out run. And what I like about him for this particular matchup, we always saw Gus Bradley and the high rate of cover 3 that they run. I mean, he leads the team, even not being a full-time player at this point, in yards per out run against cover 3, leads the team in targets against cover 3. And then if you go back to last year, he led the team in targets against cover 3 from Will Levis too. So when he's getting these single high looks, he likes to give DeAndre Hopkins these chances in the 2 games against the Titans. One was Will Levis. He had 5 for 75 and a touchdown. The other one was with Tannehill, and he had a better game, 8 for 140. But a lot of people probably haven't played DeAndre Hopkins at this point. You might have some guys on bye. I think he slots into like that wide matchup wide receiver 3 range, and maybe if he gets a lot of targets, could end up being a lot better. I'm probably going to dabble with him in some DFS this week.
I'm interested in that. I mean, Will Levis was full on Wednesday, right? And so we're going to expect Levis to be out here. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I had a lot of names on my list for this, as I mentioned before. Rashad Bateman, if he hadn't DNP'd on Wednesday, probably would have been my answer. I mentioned Michael Wilson. I'm interested in him. Xavier Hutchinson. Ray McLeod, Darius Slayton, if Malik Neighbors doesn't play again, Eric All, if Mike Gesicki is out this week. So lots of names out there. I'm going to go with Jatavian Sanders. It looks like Tommy Tremble is probably going to miss this week. We saw from Sanders last week. He had a 73.2% route participation, which is what we want to see out of him. We want to see him get that usage. He earned 5 targets. And then on the other side of it, it's not like this is a great matchup for Carolina against the Falcons from a tight end perspective. Although, I mean, it is what it is there. But we've seen the Falcons open up their passing game recently. They're 5% over their expected pass rate over the last 2 games. They should have success when they do here, and I'm hopeful that that's going to push more passing here for the Panthers, push more volume. And if Sanders is on the field and running routes and we have more volume, I think we see pretty good target numbers for him and a pretty good game from him this week. If you're really, struggling at tight end, need a streamer. I'm not going to predict the Tucker Kraft breakout that we predicted last week, but I think we could have a decent game here for Sanders, really, if you're digging deep at tight end. So if Trimble sits, I'm going to have a lot of interest in Sanders, both, from if you need a tight end and then also from a DFS perspective.
Yeah, I dig it. I also think if you're going to these bye weeks, now's the time also to sell Deontay Johnson.
The Andy Dalton, we've given up on the Andy Dalton
I don't think he's going to make it much longer.
It has been the trend line since that game against the Raiders has not been promising. I will say that.
And then once we get Bryce back, Deontay is back to the shadow realm.
It's not the best. One question here I think is interesting. Daniel Jones, or Saints quarterback on FanDuel, so Spencer Rattler on FanDuel. I mean, Daniel Jones has been fine from a fantasy perspective. He gets the Bengals this week, right? Like,
yeah, that game being on the FanDuel main slate, because it's a Sunday night game and not on DraftKings, interesting. But these type of situations always are about what are you doing with the excess salary. It's like, because in a one-off, yes, you just would play Daniel Jones. What are you doing with the excess salary is always the question I ask to the gamers when they ask these on Sunday mornings. So, the DFS, like this or this guy, I'm like, well, what are you doing with that extra salary? Usually it's a 2v2, right? So like, what are you getting to? But yeah, because Rattler on DraftKings is 4K, so he's going to be played by somebody because it's a 4K quarterback. Like if he gets 16 points, if that gets you to an extra guy like that, is interesting. But that I will say FanDuel this week from a main slate perspective is a totally different game, because that Sunday night game is because Chase Brown is 5,400 on FanDuel, and I think even if Zach Moss plays, he's way playable at that price. And if Zach Moss doesn't play, he's going to be in everybody's lineup. And then you've got, if Neighbors comes back, like that game being in that hammer spot. I've had a couple of sweats this week 1 and week 4, where I had to go into like the 4:00 games clear, and I still have to sit through that whole Sunday night game, like seeing what happens. And it is not fun on FanDuel.
I kind of miss it, because I mean there was a time with DraftKings that was the case as well, and I don't know. I know
the Millie Smiz won his Millie on Sunday night when Diggs caught the Sunday night touchdown.
Yeah. And so I don't play on FanDuel a ton. I don't think I've even played on FanDuel once this year. It's just not the way I like to play. It's not I don't like the pricing structure. There's a lot of things I don't like about FanDuel. Perfectly fine company, nothing against them, but just for me and the way that I like to view things doesn't work for me. But yeah, that Sunday night game has intrigued me. At least that's the thing when I go and look at FanDuel. I'm at least intrigued by having the Sunday night game on there for sure. Neighbors, we have to get Neighbors back this week, right? Like,
Hopefully, we hope. Fingers
I
crossed.
hope so. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. But as I said, I wrote about this last week. If Neighbors is out, I mean, Darius Slayton, all that happens when Darius Slayton gets targets is he catches passes. So I don't know. Giants, trade Darius Slayton to somebody, please. Like, let's see this from Slayton. All right, we're done. We've been here too long. We've gotten to Darius Slayton talk. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, if you're listening to us on podcast form, we do this live every Thursday morning at 11:30 Eastern on YouTube, Sharp Football Analysis YouTube. Check that out. Head over to sharpfootballanalysis.com. You'll find all of Rich's worksheet previews. The only thing you need to get ready for the fantasy football week are those previews from Rich Hribar. You can use promo code ANGLES to get 20% off our fantasy package. So make sure you go and check that out. And Rich and I will be back to talk with you next week.